So I'm very pleased to be joined this afternoon. You know, we've had a couple of great presentations on insurance issues, and so we thought we'd change it up a bit. And with the currency of U.S. politics and what's gone on in the last few weeks, we wanted to try and put together a discussion. We're not going to be cheerleading for hooray or this is awful or anything like that. We want to try and take an objective look at what we're now facing from our friends in the States and what that could mean with respect to public policy making and other things. So I'm very pleased to be joined by our colleague from our DC office, Neil Hare. Neil, I could spend our whole time reading off his resume, but simply, I could. Simply put, Neil's got decades and decades of experience advising Fortune 500 companies in just about anything to do with the public policy function, which goes beyond the U.S. And obviously has geopolitical ramifications. But he's also been involved in some of the key sectors, including financial concerns in the financial sector, transportation, energy, which is going to take on a greater importance in the months ahead, of course, and just really helping these companies from all these sectors navigate what can sometimes be a real leviathan in the U.S. government and the way policies are made and laws are enacted in the States. So we're very pleased, and please join me in welcoming Neil with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
So, and I'll say this too, we'll try and read the room a little, but we don't mean this to be a dialogue between the two of us that we're just letting you in on either. So we will be opening it up for some questions, and you can let us know how well we've done by trying to stay right down the middle without leaning one way or the other. But I think there's a lot of topics that leave questions open as to what we're facing in the next 4 years or maybe 2 years of the new administration. And I want to start off there if we can, Neil. Certainly you can watch any cable network in the States right now. And if you're a supporter of the Trump group, you point to the fact we won every swing state. We won the popular vote, which no Republicans done since 2004. We have a very clear mandate. And then you hear the opponents say, wait a minute, those swing states were all won basically by a 51-49 ratio. You still have a Congress that there's a razor-thin majority for the Republicans in the House. So are both sides right in their assessment of where we're at? And if they're both right, what does that mean for the next 4 years in terms of what type of leadership we're going to see from the Trump administration and the executive branch when it comes to policy making?
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks to you, Arthur and Lori. It's great to be with you. So the answer to that question is yes, it's a full mandate. It's a complete mandate with a couple of caveats. One being, obviously, was a kind of a unique election that we haven't had before with the switch from Biden to Harris, in basically August. And she really didn't have time to, explain herself to the American people and explain her brand and answer a few questions that she did have trouble answering. So that's one caveat. The second of all, it's not the greatest mandate of all time. I mean, it wasn't as big a mandate as Obama had. He had more electoral votes, more popular votes, and a bigger margin in the House and the Senate. That being said, it is clear, I think, to all of us that the American people spoke, and their message was very clear. He got huge improvements in certain demographic groups that were quite surprising. He did much better with Latino men, about 48% of Latino men. He did much better with African American men, and also the youth vote. So it wasn't kind of even what he did in 2016, which was a lot more clear cut in who voted for him this time around. So I would say that, and he does have the Senate and the House, albeit slim, but he has it. And I would say for the next 2 years, this is going to be the time when he can get as much done as he can, because projections for at least the Senate in the midterms, there's more Democrat seats open that should go Democratic, and the Senate could flip. So I think he does have a mandate fully, and the question is, what is he going to do with it?
Yeah, and that's the question that, you don't have to look too far back in American history where Reagan in 1980 came in with an incredible mandate. Clinton did the same thing after breaking 12 years of Republican stronghold in 92. Both of those presidents in their first midterm elections got demolished. Demolished. The Newt Gingrich, former associate of Denton's, his contract with America in 94, I think, stunned a lot of people at the time. So does that indicate that the first 2 years could be a real whirlwind, or is there cause for a more measured approach to what's going on?
I think that's the big question. And just to go back to Obama quickly, he used up that mandate on the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, which has stood the test of time despite efforts to overturn it. But after that, there was no big pieces of legislation that came out of the Obama administration for the next 6 years. So Trump, in theory, just has 4, and I think that will be the case. And the first, I do, don't worry, I think it'll be true. He also, the tax cuts that he enacted in 2017, which are up for reauthorization, renewal, or they will die, that's going to be the number one thing. So he's got to come out of the gate and do taxes. That's going to take time, because it's not just a rubber stamp, let's renew it. Everyone is going to come back to the table, and everybody's going to want their tax cuts and make their changes and get theirs. And that process is going to take time. And he can't stop time. I mean, guy can do a lot of things. He can't stop time. And he also can't slow down Washington very much. I mean, the whole American system is designed to go slowly and to be messy and to stop things from happening quickly. So he gets tax cuts done. What's next? And people aren't really sure. I mean, we think immigration, because that was his big selling point, right? But it's not just going to be mass deportations, which isn't really also, I think, going to be possible. There has to be some laws around that, and we've never had a bipartisan. Well, we had one on the floor last time around, and it didn't pass. George W. Bush had one that he was working on, and then 9/11 happened, and that went out the window. So that could get real messy. So, what's the third thing going to be? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned bipartisanship. Maybe he needs to focus on some things that he might have bipartisan support on. You and I were listing off a couple of them when we were talking earlier. Trade could be a big one, and again, being completely nonpartisan about it, there seems to be bipartisan support for getting tougher on China, whatever that means. Are these the types of things, and how that folds into tariff policy? Are these the types of things that we can expect to see maybe earlier in the mandate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. And interestingly, China is the most sort of bipartisan issue in Washington. Sort of surprising to me. So in other words, both parties are extremely concerned about China as a military force, what they might do to Taiwan, that they're growing their military, and what they do on the trade front. You may recall, I mean, Trump enacted tariffs against China, and then Biden kept them, and still they're still there. And I think how we treat China and what we do on the trade front with them does fall over to everybody else, including our friends like Canada. Trump in a speech at the New York Economic Club was talking about 10% across the board tariffs with every country, friends and others alike. Is he going to go down that road? I don't know, but he will get support when it comes to China, for sure. And that'll start on the trade front and the tariff front, and how that spills over to everybody else remains to be seen.
Everyone's, I'm not sure if this is a bipartisan issue, but everyone's kind of watching Vivek and Musk right now, and this Department of Government Efficiency. One, do you think that got bipartisan I won't say support, but interest? And if it does, like, could we see revolutionary things here where smaller government, respect for taxpayers' dollar, like, is that going to be the mantra, or is something else going on with what's planned, do you think?
Well, I think people are scared of Elon Musk and what he's up to. You know, he's got his space program that has $15 billion in U.S. government contracts. He's the richest person in the world, and he's a really smart guy. So I'm hearing a lot of that, like, what is that? And what is he really up to? What's he trying to do? But the concept of government efficiency is not new. We were talking, I mean, Ronald Reagan had one of the first things he did was also a similar panel to look at government and give recommendations. It was called the Grace Commission. If you Google that, there's like a 450-page report on what they came up with, and they didn't enact too much of that. Likewise, Bill Clinton started a similar program that Al Gore ran for 5 years to look at how do you advance government efficiency and using technology and reducing the federal workforce and things like that. So, what DOGE is how I say it. I don't know if that's true. It's the same thing. I mean, when they're talking about, can they create an app that lets Americans file taxes, using an app on your phone? That's got issues actually on the right because people think that's the government filing your taxes for you and looking into your information and privacy problems. But I think the most benign way to look at it is, yeah, sure. I mean, we could cut lots of dollars out of the budget. We could cut workforce, but how extreme is he going to get? He can't. The idea that he's going to move half the workforce into the middle of the country out of Washington, D.C. is not logistically possible. There would be lawsuits filed left, right, and center. The federal workforce is unionized. It's just not something you can do by snapping your fingers. And I think that's where people have to realize that a lot of things we're talking about just can't happen. Likewise, the budget. I mean, 65% of the U.S. budget is baked in. I mean, it's the military. They're looking at raising that budget. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So, yeah, you can cut it. You're not going to shut down the Department of Education. That's one thing people are really worried about. You just can't do that overnight without triggering so much litigation amongst other triggers that people could take to stop that from happening.
What about border security? Because I think we Canadians were a little surprised that the nominee, Mr. Homan, for all that he could have said about the southern border, he paid particular attention to Canada and singled us out as, I think the word he used was vulnerability. That came as a bit of a surprise to me that and I'm self-interested. I don't want to be lined up at the Ambassador Bridge for 6 hours when I'm going to a Michigan Wolverines football game. So let's get serious here about it. But that might be the most ambitious piece of the project, but it might be the toughest as well. You don't just build the wall on day one. You don't deport 2 million people overnight. Where is this going? Because I think this sent some shockwaves through my country for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things that come out of the Trump administration or the movement. I mean, you always have to kind of take a pause and take it with a grain of salt. I don't think, unless you want to build a wall and pay for it, Canada. Any takers on that? No. I don't think we're going to be asking for that. And again, I think it goes back to the sober notion of you got to reform the system, right? I mean, we can build a wall at the southern border. I think at this point, everyone's like, build a wall. It's fine. You want to build a wall, you can get American companies, American products, go build it. But there hasn't been a wall in the history of this planet that people didn't climb over or get through, including the Great Wall of China, the Maginot Line. It goes on and on. So the point is, how do you get those workers into the country? I mean, I travel the U.S. all the time to smaller markets and talk to business owners, and the number one issue in the United States is workforce. They can't find workers, and now remote workers who live in a small market can get a job in a big market. Nobody wants to work in restaurants. Restaurant industry is hurting. Healthcare, agriculture. The list goes on and on. So we need workers. So it's not just about security. It's about how do you get the workers into the country. I mean, we still have the J-1 visa program where, you can come and get a master's or a PhD in the United States, and then we make you go home for 2 years and take that education home, and then you don't come back. And we've trained you and we've lost you. I mean, that's something that needs to be changed. Caps on H-1B visas. That has to be changed. I mean, we need these workers. So I think we do need border security. Every country does. There are bad people coming across the southern border. I get it. I don't think really many people are concerned about that with Canada. But you have to reform the law in order to really fix the problem. And, is that number two? I really want to know if that's what his number two policy initiative will be and how much capital he's willing to burn on that.
Just before we leave the idea of what might be bipartisan support and what might not be, Trump actually had an interesting take on cybersecurity during the campaign. And that's something that obviously, cyber insurance is something that's vexed, I think, the markets in past years. What can Trump realistically do to improve a cybersecurity world? He knows where some of the problems are. He knows where the hacks are coming from. Some of them may be Russians, and whether or not that's a no-fly zone for him or not is an open argument. But that's something that if he could make ground on would actually be a positive coming out of the Trump administration. Can he do it?
Well, that's one where I don't think there's a choice. I mean, you look at technology and AI, it's moving at such a rapid pace. Governments the world over can't avoid it. I mean, I actually worked at the first .com era in 1999. The real execution of sort of internet and e-commerce took probably 20 years. Then mobile, until everyone had a smartphone, probably took 10. And I think AI is moving at a pace of like two to 4 years. It's going to change economies, and that involves cyber. That involves what's real, what isn't real. I mean, how do you deal with that? And then you have the foreign. I mean, China invests way more money hacking than they do on their military. You talk about Taiwan. I did a lot of work in Taiwan. They hack Taiwan 10,000 times a day, and God knows what they're doing. So I don't think Trump or the new Congress can avoid doing something on cyber and AI. Likewise, your government, EU, all of that. So that's one where they're going to have to address it one way or the other, and be smart about it. I mean, most of our, I don't know about your parliament, but our Congress is not the most tech savvy people in the world. So it's how do they do it smartly and correctly and not hurt the tech industry, which is, the golden goose for many of us. So.
Let's switch gears for a minute and go back to, I don't want to frame this as who's Trump's opposition, but obviously the system as it's set up in the States is supposed to be very different than Canada's. With the checks and balances, we've seen some nominations come forward now that are drawing attention. There's questions as to whether even the Republicans in the Senate will go along with every one of the nominations. What does the legislative framework look like? Does Trump have a path through Congress as long as he controls both houses, or are there groups, the same type of group that jumped up and bit McCarthy in his seat for leader of the House?
Yeah, 100%. It's Trump's party. It's Trump's. I mean, it's not even really the GOP. I mean, it's the MAGA party. And those people in Congress are MAGA Republicans, and they're proud of it. When was the election? 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, people might not have said that at a cocktail party, even though they were going to vote for him. And now everyone's wearing their hats and their stuff, and they're proud of it. And I think that's what he has on the Republican side of the Senate, the House, and across the nation. Fact. The Democrats, conversely, don't even have a leader anymore. There is no leader, which is common. This is not unusual after an election like this. They need to find a new leader. I don't know who that is. It's not going to be Harris. It's not going to be Nancy Pelosi. It could be Hakeem Jeffries. perhaps Gavin Newsom from California. So, and one of the biggest problems that they had in this election was, Harris was continually asked, how are you going to be different than Joe Biden? She was asked that on day one of her election and of her campaign, and 5 days before the election, she sat down with Hallie Jackson at NBC. She asked her the same question. She couldn't answer the question. So, in my opinion, she could have said, I'm going to do a lot of the same things because he did a lot of good things, but I'm going to be slightly different. But, she didn't, and that's fine. But what is the message now for Democrats in the United States? And they got to figure it out. I mean, I could help them, but I think they need to figure that out. They need to figure out who their leader is. I mean, I think if we had a lot of people blame Joe Biden for not stepping aside a year ago and letting a natural primary occur where, Harris would have been probably one of 4, 5, 6 candidates. I don't know if she would have won that or not. She may have, but there's some strong candidates. There's some strong, leaders on the Democratic side, but they have to regroup and come up with a message for the American people because, they lost some interesting groups. I mean, they were always the party of the unions. You had a lot of union members voting for Trump. The head of the Teamsters spoke at the Republican convention. The Latinos were a lock. They lost, as we said earlier, they lost that. African-American men lost them. So how do you get those folks back and retake the Congress and the White House? But right now, yes, to answer your question, Trump can get stuff done. There's a lot of things that Democrats will vote for. There's energy policy that I think they would vote for. The tariff, foreign policy is really the domain of the president. So for the next 2 years, I think he can get stuff done with some Democratic support.
So one thing people are looking towards is deregulation.
Yeah.
That's clearly coming now. What that means to one person can be something completely different to another.
Yeah.
What are some of the deregulation priorities do you think that the Trump administration's looking at? Obviously, it's going to be tied to taxation, but energy, he wants to obviously, Lee Zeldin getting nominated for the EPA sends a signal.
Yeah, I think
is it gonna be back to the Rockefeller years, or are we stopping somewhere on the continuum before that?
Well, I think again, energy. He's still using drill, baby, drill. That they love that one. It still works. So I think you're going to see the energy deregulation, pipeline issues, fracking. A lot of this will affect Canada as well. He's going to want to let as much of that go, and new sources of energy too. I mean, he's for everything. He wants everything to be built and to be creating jobs. So he's not going to say no to wind or solar or nuclear. Nuclear is probably the one that may come back the most. You know why? Because of these data centers. AI is powered on these data centers that suck so much energy. They're actually talking of building like mini nuclear power plants, or putting 3 Mile Island back online to power those data centers, and he's going to be all for that. I assure you. So that's one. I think. What else was I thinking of that I'm just blanking on? The whole ESG movement. You guys have that up here?
Oh, it's a thing. Yes.
I knew I could get you to laugh. I knew it. I think that's going to take a big backseat now. Big backseat. And likewise, unfortunately, DEI as well is going to take a big backseat. If you followed the election, you knew that the whole transgender issue was a big issue. And I think you're going to see all that move to the backseat for now. It's not. I don't think it's a danger of never coming back, but I think that's going to move to the backseat. And then I think I heard he's going to totally deregulate the insurance industry.
Well, I was going to ask you about financial products and financial deregulation, because obviously some things are getting more serious. Terrorist financing, anti-money laundering. Those things have to remain in place to some extent. People will argue in those industries whether or not they're attacking the right things. But insurance, obviously, and the coupling of insurers in the financial products game and things like that. Are we going to see a broad opening up, do you think?
I think so. I mean, you're going to get the SEC is going to, you'll see a change in leadership there, and they won't. They probably won't be as strictly enforcing or as activist as maybe it is now. Definitely not on sanctions. You asked about sanctions and risk and things like that. I don't know. I mean, then you're getting into Russian policy, I guess, and I can't speculate on that. But I think the general Trump, mantra and policy landscape is as much deregulation as can occur, and as he can handle himself as well. So you are going to see that.
And there's other industry groups. Pharmaceuticals are watching very closely. Obviously, Trump and some of the people that will be part of his administration have had a lot to say, not just on vaccines, but other things as well. At the same time, he wants to try and bring as much of that back into the continental U.S. as he can. If you're designing it, if you're manufacturing it, if you're packaging it, if you're marketing it, if you're financing it, he wants it in the States. What do you see that doing for contiguous countries like Canada?
Well, I mean, I think, there's a couple of questions there. I mean, on the pharmaceutical side, I mean, you got RFK coming in. So if you have a cow, you're going to be in the raw milk business. It's going to be great. He will likely get confirmed. And then you just saw that he put in Dr. Oz to head the CMS. And I think the person coming in to take over FDA is a surgeon, Markey, I think it's Markey, from Johns Hopkins, who was kind of outspoken on vaccines. It's interesting, you got all these people outspoken against vaccines. Many people credit Trump with Operation Warp Speed of getting the COVID vaccine done so quickly, and yet they kind of want to turn away from it. So that's an interesting one. But I think when it comes to how other countries will be impacted, especially Canada, I mean, I think the word I use with Trump is he's very transactional. So it's kind of like the NATO thing, right? It's he's not saying no. He's just saying what's in it for us. What's in it for the U.S. I mean, we're putting in all this money. What are you doing? And you're worried about the Russians. That's not our problem. It's your problem. And what are you going to give the United States? And you saying you're going to only go up to 2% of your GDP for military, is not even good enough. Someone was saying that's like saying, you had an F and now you have a D. That's nothing to write home about. Let's see what you're doing. And I think with Canada, I think it's not just that. I think it's also economic. I mean, how are you going to come to the United States or the Trump administration and want to make deals and be, a good economic partner, and what's in it for the U.S. It's kind of crass to say what's in it for us, but it kind of is kind of like that.
But that's the burning question, right? Because standing up for Canada for a moment, we have three things that America desperately needs: fresh water, brain power, and we've got energy and resources and natural resources. So does that, I'm wondering, we hear the bluster,
right,
and we know about we're never going to meet our 2% commitment in NATO, and it's a real sore spot for those of us that support the military, obviously. But beyond that bluster, what is the perception of Canada in this administration? Are we more than just another partner to be dealt with?
Absolutely. I mean, Canada is a dear friend. I don't see the U.S. taking action, in an aggressive way towards Canada. That would really surprise me, especially with the things you said. I mean, just on the energy front alone, there has to be a strong partnership. There is a strong partnership that I think is only going to be bigger and be more fruitful for both countries. So I don't see Canada. I would put Canada almost in a unique category over anybody in terms of the partnership. I mean, we share this huge border and resources. and culture in some ways. So I wouldn't worry about it. And you know what, I would say this to others too. I mean, I was talking to our office in New Zealand, and they're worried about the relationship between the United States. I mean, they have the meat, I think dairy and steel, which is much more concern, right? I mean, tariffs on their meat industry will be really, really tough, and steel is out there as well. So, but at the end of the day, I think if you cut through that bluster and that noise, our friends will still be our friends, and we're not going to look to hurt those people. But it's going to come down to, it will be Russia, Iran, and China, and North Korea, I guess, that ultimately is who we're going after, not Canada.
And anyone that knows me will know this may be the only time I ever quote President Carter. But he had a great saying one time that, like, Canada's not a neighbor. I can pick up and move away from my neighbor. Like, I'm here. Yeah. And that set a special relationship in his mind with Canada. You know, we were all, well, some of us were very disappointed in the cancellation of things like the XL pipeline. And it just seemed that, like, if we had a favorable government in Canada, we lost a favorable government on that file in the White House. Then it flips, and just so happens we have a different administration in Canada, and it still doesn't get done. And you know, we hear emphasis on things like climate policy instead, and other priorities that is fine for people to view as the priorities of the day. Can there be a responsible energy explosion? Like, can North America, including Mexico, become a real quadrant of energy that we will not only be energy self-sufficient, but we'll all be net exporters, gaining credits with things like natural gas being exported. Canada's got nuclear technology that we can, with the right partners, provide. Is that something that we could see as a boom that America supports?
I think so. As I said, I think Trump will support everything. I think, you know, I don't think he's going to hold one thing back over another. I think the real issue is climate policy. I mean, you know, he left the Paris Accords. I don't think he's definitely not aligned with, I would say, you know, Canada and the EU on climate policy. I mean, he still has people around him who don't believe it's real, or it's as bad as people say, or climate change is happening. So that's going to be a debate and a bit of an impediment. But in terms of what you're asking is, yes, I think you'll see more energy production. I mean, we already have in the United States are producing more oil domestically than I think we ever have. I think natural gas is going to be big. I think nuclear is coming back. But, you know, what happens, you know, 4 years is a very short amount of time when you're talking energy, right? I mean, we're still, as much as we want to move into new forms of energy, I mean, it's going to take 100 years to get off fossil fuels. And that's, you know, that's just the bottom line. Hopefully we can do it in a smart way that protects the environment, but it's going to be that way for a while.
Right. So I see we have about 10 minutes left, and I never believe that I'm the only one that can ask the right questions. So I'm wondering if anyone has questions that they want to point to us, and go ahead.
The antitrust environment in the U.S., I'm just curious on how do you think that will evolve?
That's a tough one. I mean, it kind of depends. I think it's going to, you know, I think it depends on how big a deal are we talking about here. Are you talking about the tech industry? I mean, that's the real big battle right now is trying to break down the tech industry, and that's a big one. You're going to still see that one. You know, is what's going to happen to Google and Meta, Amazon, X, those kind of things. And I think, you know, I don't think people want to take apart Google. I think that's going to be a heavy lift. And I don't think, you know, I think Trump, if you're talking in terms of President Trump, he's going to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And I don't think he would let something happen that was going to be that detrimental economically under his watch.
Other questions?
Yeah. So my interest is in all the articles I've been reading, particularly like I'm sort of more closer to home in my issues and cost of living and inflation, and everything I read in his policies would suggest that that's only going to get worse. Even Powell is starting to back off in terms of reductions of, and we follow your Fed, right? So it impacts us. If Elon had his way and kicked out 13 million, what's that going to do for cost of those jobs that require bring food to the stores and so on and so forth? So what do you think the real impact is, and are we going to continue to have an inflationary environment in the next few years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's $1 million question. And again, I think, at the end of the day, our election, as it usually is, was won on the economy. Americans believed that the economy was far better under Trump than it was under Biden. If you look at the numbers, we are down to historic lows in unemployment. The stock market hit all-time highs. The cost of gasoline went to under $3. I don't think you can buy that anywhere in the world. You guys pay a lot of taxes on your gas, right? I mean, you could still buy a 72-inch Samsung TV for $600. I mean, so the perception, I think, was a little bit off. And people, I think, also have amnesia about what happened during COVID. I mean, we, like you all, we were shut down. The economy was shut down, which caused a backlog in inflationary pressure, right? And then Biden came in and he put trillions of dollars into the economy. But that started with Trump. I mean, Trump had the Paycheck Protection Program that pumped all that money into the economy, and then that was followed by Biden, which led to inflation that we're now seeing improving. So I think inflation is going to keep getting better. I think the economy is going to keep getting better. I think the Fed's already showing that they're lowering rates, even though we had a little uptick in inflation, but the jobs numbers are still good. Stock market is still good. Housing market's getting better. So I think inflation is going to continue to improve. But then we get back into the tariff issue, right? I mean, tariffs are a tax. That 72-inch TV that I just said you could buy for $600, now it's $1,200. Because you can't get it from China anymore. Those are the kind of bogeys that are out there that I don't that we'll see, and I don't think Trump wants to see inflation go up either under his watch.
And everything's a lever, and we were talking earlier about the Department of Government efficiencies. Limited government, really making cuts, because it doesn't matter what political stripe is in power wherever, they all just seem to be spending money they don't have. And so if Trump is really going to be the revolutionary that says we're getting back to living within our means. Now, his first administration, it was $1 trillion deficit every year. So he's got a lot of work to do to get religion on that. But it's going to be interesting.
Well, the budget, if we want to get into the budget deficit conversation, I mean, that's, both parties in our country spending money that they don't have on whatever their priorities are and just kicking that can down the road. So I don't see that being addressed.
Fingers crossed. Right? Fingers crossed.
That's not going to be addressed in the next 4 years.
If we have time for one more, I was just kind of curious, building off that. I know last year the Saudis kind of went back on their contract with the U.S. on supplying their oil in U.S. dollars. So a lot more countries don't have to keep U.S. dollars on their balance sheet. In contrast with Trump's increase in tariffs on a lot of the imports, how do you think BRICS will play a role? The new BRICS currency that they're using for global trade?
I'm not familiar.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with BRICS.
Trump's going to have to move pretty quickly to get the U.S. dollar back as the only relevant currency. What you said about Saudi Arabia, China's backing that too. So the fight's going to be on. And we haven't even talked about some of the other hot button issues, like Iran's on the agenda, how Trump deals with Iran day one, which he's got to do. There's going to be a whole new spectrum there. I don't propose that I've got the answers on any of it, but if Trump does not prioritize getting the American dollar back as the only relevant currency for things like international energy trade, he's losing a lot of ground.
Also, I would say that Saudis would be in line with what Trump would want to do in a lot of areas, based on what I know. So I would be hard pressed to see them go against what he's asking for.
The one could argue the Saudis are waiting for Trump to deal with Iran.
Yeah.
Like even in the Middle East, this hegemony, suddenly Saudi Arabia is our best partner. And I've heard Israeli officials say, "Don't worry about Saudi Arabia," which you just didn't hear 10 years ago. So,
I think that was his first trip. I think Trump's
Yeah.
first trip abroad was to Saudi Arabia.
Everything's
Those pictures of him dancing. It was
what he dances?
sure.
I thought it was football players. They just started
They're
that.
doing the Trump dance. That's what they're doing to celebrate.
We've got a time for a little more if there's other questions.
Do you think the Senate will advocate and just accept all his nominees? Will they do that at recess?
No, I think they'll stop one. If the three most controversial are Hegspeth, Gates, and RFK, I think that one of them will not make it. Probably Gates, from what I've heard. I think at the end of the day, I look, the senators, I don't think they want to lose all their power either. I mean, especially the ones that aren't up for re-election for 4 or 6 years. And Trump, remember, I mean, he's kind of a lame duck, right? I mean, he's, especially after the first 2 years, and if the Senate flips to Democrats, that's it. The next presidential election will start. That's a 2-year cycle. I'm sure he'll still have influence over the party and who the next candidate is. But, I don't think senators want to just say, forget it. And there's several Republican senators, who come from states that are much more moderate and, independent minded that I don't think they want to just fold on everything. But he'll get 2 out of 3. I think there's someone back there.
Since the election, some provincial politicians here have argued for developing direct relationships with the Trump administration at the exclusion of potentially the Canadian federal government, but definitely to the exclusion of the Mexican economy and moving away from the traditional trilateral NAFTA relationship. How do you see that kind of playing out with the Trump administration?
Well, you may want to jump in on this one because this may be more than what I understand. Again, I think it's transactional, and I also think, so if you're a Canadian province and you want to do business with the Trump administration, he's open for business and he'll listen if that's okay under your laws. Yeah. And I would also say, remember, and this does impact the insurance industry, the states are getting a lot more power. They've always had a lot of power in the United States, but they will have more power. This movement, which is a conservative movement, to take power out of the federal government and put it down in the states. You're seeing this, in lots of different sectors. Education will be next. Insurance is still like that. So I think the provinces up here should pursue that and should do way more with state governments than they probably are doing. But let me defer to you on that one.
No, I think that's the key. And like, think about our, something near and dear to some of our hearts, the race to get EV plants. Are they going in Dearborn, Michigan, or are they coming to Southern Ontario? And it's just a race to the bottom. Like, how much can we just give to these struggling companies called Volkswagen, So I find it's a dangerous game, and I would not encourage any of our provinces, like, God love them, but if they think they've got the power of Donald Trump to start getting in an engagement with him directly, Trump won't lose in those situations. So I would caution any of our Canadian provinces. We've got some very talented people. I'm not saying we don't, but we don't have the firepower to be doing our own deals with the U.S. federal government. We may not like the current administration federally in Canada, or maybe we do, but if we don't, there's a ballot box question coming in a year for us too. So, and look, a lot of what we heard from our premier, he's trying to dance a line as he's heading to an election. He doesn't want to be called the Canadian Trump. So better to say, oh no, I'm against him at the bargaining table. I'm no Trump. I'm here for Ontario. And so I fear there's more politics in this and partisanship than there is good policy making. But we'll see. If Ontario has something that Trump needs, he'll deal with us. And right now, we were talking about nuclear and like small nuclear. Right now, out at Darlington, we're doing the SMR programs, and that's going international. So, the small to medium reactors for nuclear sites, that's something that Ontario's got right now, and the Bruce is doing it as well. That's of interest to all these places where nuclear is coming back in vogue. Sorry, much like my test scores in law school, I'm in a minus in the red at the moment. So I think with a great appreciation and thanks to all of you. It's not an easy topic when people are so passionate about politics, but hopefully we cut through the CNN/Fox commentary on it and provided some practical thoughts on what the next few years looks like. So thank you very much.
Yeah, let me thank you and Lori again. And I would say, again, Canada's a dear, dear friend. So I think it's all gonna work out for the best. But thank you all for having me here. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're here.